Welcome to Serious Business on NDTV. 30 minutes of hard business news. One topic, one speaker, and a conversation that's relevant to you. I'm Manvi Sinha Dhillon. It's an honor and pleasure to welcome Ginni Rometty on Serious Business today. Ginni was the 9th chairman, president, and CEO of IBM. Under her leadership, the 100-year-old company reinvented 50% of its portfolio, built a $25 billion hybrid cloud business, and established leadership in AI and quantum computing. Ginni is also the founder and co-chair of 110, which is a coalition of companies and educators committed to upskilling, hiring, and promoting 1 million Black Americans and others who don't have a 4-year college degree into family-sustaining jobs and careers by the year 2030. Ginni is also the best-selling author of Good Power, Leading Positive Change in Our Lives, Work and World. She was Fortune magazine's #1 most powerful woman in the world 3 years in a row. Ginni Rometty, welcome to NDTV.
Manvi, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you.
I'm going to apply your rule of 3, which I read in your book, and chunk our conversation into 3 parts. You've said a trio is the most memorable configuration, and I'll take your word for it. So the 3 big topics I hope to cover are: first, good power. And certainly, I feel our world, lives, and work could do with positive change right now. Second, why you believe skilling is more valuable than expensive college degrees, and that's extremely relevant for India, where 65% of India's fast-growing population is under 35, and a large majority lack the skills that are needed by a modern economy. And the third, Ginni, women at work. This year's Nobel Prize for Economics, it's been awarded to an economist for her research that explains the pay gaps between men and women. But what I want to do is leverage your hands-on experience in bringing in and keeping women in the tech workforce. So that's the agenda. Let's get started. Ginni, what is good power, and how do you distinguish it from bad power?
Well, look, I have to tell you that good power is something that, as I look back now, I could define. And when I set out to write a book, I was not convinced I wanted to write a book, but many people had talked to me about the journey I've had. And from actually being a child who was abandoned by their father to eventually end in this spot, and marry that with the moment of time that we're in, it is a time where there's plenty of examples of bad power, as you just mentioned out there, Manvi. And so what I really wanted to do was share with people my lessons learned on how to do very hard things, but do them in a positive way. Because too many people have this negative connotation about power. Yet to solve our big problems, you need power. So good power, which is bad, is a kind of power that loves tension, embraces it, but then does not divide people because of it. The second thing is that it's done very respectfully. And the third is that it celebrates progress, not looking for perfection. Because when people look for perfection, you polarize people into one camp or another. And that is, I look back on a 40-year, 50-year almost career, was one of the most powerful things that I learned. So I thought the time was right, actually, that I could share my lessons learned with people, and that it's more about how work gets done, not just what they do, is the idea behind the book.
And, you know, I've had a chance to read it, enjoyed it, and in it you've talked about the 5 principles of good power, and for the benefit of the uninitiated, what are these 5 principles?
Yes. Well, so because Manzi read the book, you know that it starts with the power of me to talk about, as an individual, that we have more power than we think we have. But then in the middle, it's called the power of we. And these are the 5 principles, which I again say is revisionist history, what I learned looking backwards now. And it's 5 things that I learned that are important to make sustained, difficult change. So the first one was that you have to be able to be in service of something. Don't serve it, be in service of. And the important difference is when you're in service of something as a company or a person, you care about fulfilling their needs before your own. And that you trust that will happen in the end. The second principle is, okay, but when you do something hard, you've got to build belief, and that's never ending. And that only happens if you deal with people by not only talking to their head, but dealing with their emotions in their heart. The third principle then is, it's really, I think, one of the most difficult, is that go ahead to change something. It's important to make change, but also know what must endure. This idea of change and endurance, and that is all about tension. Fourth principle is, in this day and age, though, whatever change will have technology, and it's called stewarding good tech. So in other words, good tech is to bring all of these technologies, managing both their upside and their downside in parallel into society. And then last but not least, okay, anything tough is hard, and it's about resilience. And resilience revolves around your own attitude and around the relationships you have. So those are the 5 principles: be in service of, build belief, know what must change, what must endure. Number 4 would be all around steward good tech, and 5, above all, be resilient.
You've set me off in many different directions, but I'm going to come to an early comment that you made, and it's stayed with me from your book as well. Growth and comfort never coexist. I'm going to repeat that so our audience really absorbs it. Growth and comfort never coexist. How did you go about learning that lesson and sort of understanding the importance of it?
Yes, it was actually almost the title of the book, Growth and Comfort Do Not Coexist. It was the alternate. And it's something that I learned over time, and I'd ask people to reframe how they look at risk. And I think one of the first episodes that it really came in materialized for me, I was always, when I would get a new job, I was always nervous about the new job. I wasn't prepared for it. And I worked for someone who was going to go on to a new role. He said to me, "You should have my job." I said, "Oh, I'm not ready for it." And he said, "Go to the interview." I went to the interview. I was offered the job, and my reaction was, "Let me go talk to my husband." And the person said, "Okay." And I went home and I told him, "Gee, I'm not ready. 2 more years. I'd have more skills for this job." And my husband said to me, "Do you think a man would have answered the question that way?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It really wasn't a gender point." He said, "I've heard this time and time again. You're concerned you don't know it. In 6 months, you'll know it, and you'll be looking for the next thing. You can't keep looking at risk this way." And in that moment, that crystallized growth and comfort do not coexist. In other words, if you're going to grow, you have to get really comfortable being uncomfortable. And that would really change how I would look at many, many things. And I would look for risk then. And these risks would get bigger and bigger over time, because I could start to associate it the risk would not be with fear. Instead, it would be with growth. And it would mean I'm learning something. And I think that's a really valuable lesson if you're a person, if you're a company, and if you're a country. It pertains across the board.
I mean, the other thing, which is tough to get your head around when you hear it the first time, and you've said it already today in our conversation, which is to prioritize progress over perfection, because it's almost sort of a default setting that if you're setting yourself a goal, you're going to aim for perfection. So again, a thought that needs sort of fleshing out, and I wanted you to do that for us.
Yes. Well, and part of how this came to be was that in writing the book, I want to give people courage to go after big, tough problems. But if you look at those problems as only either they're solved or they're not solved, you'll get very frustrated because they're so large. And so many of the things I've undertaken have been really difficult. And I had to learn to say, okay, if I can make some progress, that's a step forward. And eventually you look back and you realize how far you've come. The other reason that it's so important is that when people have very divergent views, this idea that I can't convince you all my way or all the other way. It's about looking for what are either not just points of commonality, but what are the points that I can reconcile, that I can understand your point of view and this point of view, and yet still come to advance something and make progress on both pieces. So I think that idea is really lacking, certainly in our political environment in many different countries right now. And that's what polarizes so many people, to have a view of you're with me or you're not with me, versus we may have different viewpoints, but we can actually still make progress directionally together.
You talked about sort of big jobs, big mandates, and your current focus is on an ambitious sort of mandate, skilling through 110. I want to understand what drew you to this and how you've gone about implementing this with a goal of driving real change. So first, you'd have to describe what 110 hopes to achieve.
Yes. So I will, but then I'll back up, and if you'll let me a minute on what took me there. But 110, as you said in our introduction, is about reskilling, but taking 1 million Black Americans into middle-class, upwardly mobile jobs. So these are not just service jobs that are low paying, and advancing them. But there's a background to how we got there that's really important. We're all a product of our environments and our own journeys. And I'm an engineer too, so a couple equations that I think are useful, and particularly for India too. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, when I was a child, my father abandoned our family, left my mother with no money, no food, no home. And my mother had no education past high school. Now, she was unable to get a job till she got just a little bit of education and could get a job, a little bit more. And it would crystallize for me that my mother had aptitude, but she didn't have access. God pretty well spreads aptitude evenly in the world, but not access, not opportunity. And so that equation, access and aptitude, are not equal. Then fast forward, in my time as CEO, I would go to build some very large businesses that the skills didn't exist. And it would just be serendipity that we would be working on some corporate social responsibility with high schools and a community college, or a 2-year college, as you might, or a vocational school, others would call that. And they said, okay, we'll give them advice on curriculum, internships. And we said, and if we have a chance at a job, we'll hire people. Well, lo and behold, they could do the job. It was cyber jobs at the time. This is early 2010s. And I went back and said, well, how many more people have we hired? They're doing a great job. And they said, none. And the reason being, all of our jobs required college degrees, 4-year university degrees or PhDs. Well, I would soon learn, and it would send me on a 15-year journey. I said, that can't be possible. They're doing the job. And in fact, I'll come back to what we would learn. I said, so let's go say, I said, what percentage of Americans don't have a college degree? It would be 65%. How about all developed countries? 65%. Black Americans, 80%. The numbers are large everywhere, and for many reasons. Yet, they were all able to do the jobs. So then we went back and looked at all of our jobs in the company. It took 5 years. Half of the jobs were over-credentialed, meaning they required a college degree when it really wasn't necessary to get started. And it would teach me, because then I would go and track how people did in these roles. We would hire more and more, and it turned out they were more loyal to the company, more retentive, and performed just as well as those with the college degrees, albeit maybe a year delay. And so it struck me that that equation again would be where people start should not determine where they end. They just had a different starting point than other people. And this was very powerful because it was also a talent pool, depending on the country and how you define diversity. In America, it was a talent pool that was 90% Black and brown. And here, I really value a diverse workforce, so it was an untapped pool of talent. And over a number of years, 75% got their degrees once they saw what was possible, first generation. I would go on and do this work in 30 other countries. So I know it's a little bit of a long answer, but I wanted to set that up, these kind of paradigms that access doesn't equal aptitude, and where you start should not determine where you end, and that in the end, economic opportunity is the best equalizer for people. So now, enter then I'll circle back to your question on 110. Now, that was in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in America in 2020, when companies were looking to do something for systemic racism. And people said, well, we need to give people jobs. Well, you can't give people jobs without skill. However, I said, I know how. It's this idea of hire people for skills first, not just a degree. Because we can work with many different pathways to get them skilled to get started. And so it's not just Black Americans, it's any underrepresented group, which is why it applies to every country in this world right now. And so what we're about is creating a movement, a skills-first movement, to move a whole workforce. And by the way, because of technology, even those of us with a degree, you're going to need to get new skills every couple of years anyways. So it matters for everyone to be skills first. Sorry for that long answer.
No, but it's such a relevant sort of subject, even in the Indian context, that, we're welcome to get the long answer from you. But what we're going to do is take a very quick break. And when we return, whether you like it or not, we're going to have to talk about how you are a role model for
Uh,
women in business, beyond business. So brace yourself. Back in a moment with Ginni Rometty on Serious Business. Welcome back to Serious Business on NDTV. In conversation today with Ginni Rometty, former chairman and CEO of IBM. I know, Ginni, you've wanted to be seen for your work, not your gender. But today, have you accepted with grace that you are a female role model? And there is value in that, even good power, if I can call it that.
yes, I have. And honestly, maybe there are days I wish I had realized that sooner, right? And I think for all of us and those listening, many of us are role models in whether it's gender or another reason that we're a role model for someone. And I know for me, I finally recognized that it took some number of years because being a woman in engineering, there weren't many of us. And so I always said to people, please, as you just said, recognize me for my accomplishments. Please don't pay attention to my gender. But I did at some point realize, and this is, I think, the point, that it's really not about you, that people cannot be what they cannot see.
Yeah.
So it was very selfish to think, gee, I don't want to be a role model. I actually do need to be a role model so many other people can aspire to that.
You know, one line in your book sort of summarizes to me the expectations for successful women at work. And maybe I'm using that sentence in the wrong context, but there was this sentence which talked about being nurturing, caring, and supportive while also being analytical, rigorous, and demanding. And I had to take a long breath after that, because I said, wow, that's what it takes to be a successful woman at work like you've been. Isn't that a tough ask at some level?
It is, but I also believe in this day and age, whether you're a man or a woman, the same characteristics you just outlined are what's required for leadership in this day and age. And some people would call that feminine traits in some ways, married with what are hard skills. And I think that is what the workforce of the future now wants, because it's a leader who has both empathy, but is firm and direct when needed to be. And so I did feel that long list you just said, in the end, is the secret of good, strong, and it is a secret of good power, because the point is not to be easy and not do tough things, but it is how you do those things. Because as you know, Monty, how I end the book says, look, you'll be remembered for what you do, but you also might be remembered more for how you did it. And I think that is the point, that, how you do your work in this day and age matters quite a bit.
Well, the 2023 Nobel Prize for Economics, Claudia Golden, for her work on factors and barriers for women at work. And, I think it's a welcome spotlight. But I want you to draw on your own experiences at IBM and explain to us, women in tech, what happens to them? Why do they drop out? And is it possible to bring them back into the workplace in a good, sort of steady, progressive way?
Yeah. Well, and I think what I'm about to say applies to more than just women in tech, but it's most acute in women in tech for sure, because the starting spot in some countries is lower for women in tech to begin with. And part of that starts with just confidence to want to go into science and technology, engineering and math, or the STEM areas. And I try to tell so many women, I could tell them all to start in engineering, but I don't want to be an engineer. And I said, but what engineering does is just teach you how to do problem solving. And so think of it as a launch pad, not necessarily as a destination. So for one, it's just changing the paradigm of what it means to go into those kinds of areas. And then, as I said earlier, women can be their own toughest critic about confidence. So the next thing that I have seen as time goes on, women do end up leaving the workforce for various reasons. It could be children, family, etc. And what I have found is one of the most important things. I actually did a study. We had, I won't tell you the long part of how we got there, but I said, how many of our women have left the workforce that were engineers? And I want you to go survey why they're not back. And most of the answers had to do with confidence. So back to growth and comfort never coexist. And so we started something called returnships, which said, okay, 1 day, 4 months, whatever it is, come, stay as long as you want or as short as you need to feel confident again. And many people, I think our shortest was 1 day. Some did the whole 4 months, others in between. But to say, geez, the world hasn't passed me by yet. I still have these same skills. And this is really about being critical of yourself when it's not necessary. So my biggest learning then was what I had to do is keep women in the workforce. And so that would lead to a huge number of policies for flexibility that my chances of women advancing in technology and other areas had more to do with my ability to keep them in the workforce, or if they left, get them back into the workforce. And that's what was required. Now, that's not one thing, Monty. It's many, many different things. I always say people looking for a silver bullet, that's wrong in this area, because it's everything from dealing with bias to dealing with flexibility to dealing with programs for advancement. And you just have to keep adding to it, and you keep making progress.
So opt for progress over perfection. Once again, applying your maxim. Ginni Rometty, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time here on NDTV Serious Business. An absolute pleasure and honor, as I said at the start of this conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.